Okay, so good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining our Women's History Month event. This will be all around how to champion intersectionality within your ERG programming. Before we get started with the discussion and introduce you to our amazing panelists, I did want to do a quick introduction of myself and our company. So I am Mable Huang, co-founder and CMO of Chezi. My brother and I founded Chezi in June of 2020 because we wanted to create inclusive and equitable workplaces. Chezi is the Igbo word for reflect, and we believe all companies need to reflect on their DEI strategy to figure out if it's doing or having the impact that they want it to have as it relates to their diverse talent. So we knew that we wanted to help minorities in the workplace, and after countless conversations with DEI managers and DEI professionals like yourselves, we found that we wanted to do that by focusing on employee resource groups. ERGs are often the centerpiece of corporate DEI work, but too often they go under-resourced and underutilized. And ERG leaders are spending way too much time doing things that aren't actually driving the activities that drive employee retention and employee satisfaction. So Chezi is an all-in-one solution designed to help you build impactful employee resource groups. We help you easily and seamlessly track membership, events, budgets, and engagement so you can focus on what matters, building inclusive communities that can retain your talent. If you'd like to learn more about our platform or our dashboard, please feel free to reach out to me or my brother at team@chezi.co, and we'll send out some more information or contact information after this event. But let's go ahead and hop into it. We have our panelists, Liz Valadez, Jordan Budget, Audrey Galo, and Mable Huang. So let's get them off mute. Are you all off mute? Liz, Audrey?
Yeah, we're here.
Okay, awesome. So let's go ahead and do some introductions. So Audrey, I'll start with you. If you can just share, name, company, ERG affiliation, and then how you identify.
Yeah, absolutely. Excited to be here and excited for this conversation. Hi, everyone. My name is Audrey Galo, pronouns she, her. I am the chair of the Women's ERG at General Assembly. I identify as a queer, Latinx woman. I'm a mom, also the daughter of Central American immigrants. I could go on, but I'll stop there for now.
Cool. Thank you, Audrey, for being here. Jordan, we'll go to you.
Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm very excited for this conversation today. So I am Jordan Budget. I work for the NBA in our media partnerships department, where I bridge the gap between marketing partners, so like Nike, Adidas of the world, with media platforms, which is also our media partners. So thinking of ESPN, Facebook, for example. I also lead our Black network, which is it's called Dream in Color at the NBA as well, where I've been a part of many conversations internally that have shaped just some of the social impact, justice impact work that you may have seen from the NBA externally since 2020. So exciting year to do that. But I identify my pronouns as she, her. I identify as a woman of mixed race. So my father is Chinese and my mom is African American. And so I obviously identify with both of those races, and very excited again to have this conversation. I'm sure a lot of that will come out in some of the discussion as well. So thank you for having us. And I don't know if you want me to pass it, I can pass it to Mable.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay.
Super cool, Jordan. Thanks Chezi and Dumavi and Toby for organizing this stellar panel here. My name is Mable. I identify as she, her, Asian American, Chinese American, in other words, ABC, American born Chinese. I'm with Airbnb. My day job is strategic partnerships. Specifically, we're working on a program called the Academy I always butcher this, Airbnb Entrepreneurship Academy program is to build more diversity into our host community. Check it out there if you're interested in learning more. I started off as a community organizer based in San Francisco Bay Area, launching our first Asian American outreach program. over almost 6 years now. And doing that external community building work has really set me up for later stepping in as our Asians at Global Chair for our ERG group. I've been the chair for over 3 years now. Recently, my role has evolved to lead as our Asians at Executive Engagement Lead. I also sit on the Asian Leaders Alliance leadership team. Really, it's like an umbrella group for, excuse me, over 200 corporate Asian ERG groups and members. And I know that I think Toby, a few of us are also part of the Slack channel or group there as well. So yeah, great to continue build community through these various roles. And I'm going to pass it over to, I'm forgetting who has not spoken.
To Liz.
Liz, to you.
Hi, thank you, Mabel. Thank you all for being here today, and thank you for putting this presentation together. I think that ERG is one of those things that everybody wants to do it, but it's a lot of work and how to do it right? So I'm glad that this information is getting out there. I identify as she and her. I currently work at Workday as a director of business operations, and basically what that means is I fix broken stuff. So I fix broken processes. I see how we can do things better, how we can make people work at their peak, so that they feel satisfied with the job that they're doing here and feel that they're in the right place for them. That's my day job. That's my mind job. My job of passion is leading our Latinx ERG. I co-founded the ERG about 5 years ago here at Workday. We started out with, back then, our first ERG was the Talented 10th, which was our Black employee ERG, now known as Black at Workday. And then we started expanding out. And so since then, we have about 13 ERGs that we have within the company. And what we're looking at that our organizational leaders have listened to a lot of the things that we want to implement. And I can talk a little bit about that later. But one of the things I think that, for companies, I think a lot of the times they come in with the savior syndrome, like we're going to save you and we're going to do this for you. And what they end up solving is a lot of symptoms, not root causes. And I think the key role that ERGs play is that we have that information, just ask us and we'll help you solve the true problems. And I think that is a role definitely that ERGs can serve. I also am one of the co-leads for the Silicon Valley Latinas in Tech chapter. And this passion, by the way, is not something that I grew up. I grew up from Mexico, came here. But I think this passion developed as I was doing my study for my dissertation for my doctorate on the experience of first generation Latinos in tech. And so again, I'll talk a little bit more about that as we get in here.
Awesome. And thank you all for being here again. Let's jump right into the discussion. So intersectionality, it's been something that has, I feel like in recent years, really been like a hot topic or a hot keyword, buzzword. So just to level set with everyone, intersectionality is the acknowledgement that everyone has their own unique experiences of discrimination and oppression, especially when we consider everything and anything that can marginalize people. So that's gender, race, class, sexual orientation, physical ability, veteran status, et cetera. So first question for our panelists is, how do you champion intersectionality within your respective ERGs?
I can start. So again, because we started out with our Black employee ERG, what we found out that a lot of our challenges are very similar, as ERGs. And whether you're a woman or, in the woman ERG, Latinx and the Latinx ERG, a Black employee and a Black ERG, is that we're not getting promoted. We're not being hired. It's all the same challenges. And there's, you've heard the clay ceiling, the bamboo ceiling, the glass ceiling, it's all there. And what we realized is that, for our fight to be important, everyone's fight has to be important. So you have to support the EBC that's behind something. So for example, when it's, Black History Month or Women's Month or National Hispanic Heritage Month, you support those EBCs. Pride Month. in that. And so for National Hispanic Heritage Month this last year, we actually partner with all our EBCs. So we did being Latino and gay, being Afro-Latinos, and kind of showing that there's, that we intersect a lot and that we have different perspectives. The other thing that we've done is within ERG, a lot of the things that we've developed are these grassroots things where we've solved big problems. To give you an example, our Black employee ERG here at Workday launched what we called opportunity on-ramps. And this is all about hiring people that don't have a college education. And how they started that was they partnered with Europe for one cohort. And that now is a whole department around bringing in people that are returning to work, military, veterans, different groups. On the Latinx side, we started a training program where we want to elevate our managers into director roles and our directors into VPs. And we started out where we did this grassroots training program, and it was so well received and so successful where many of the people were promoted that now it's being expanded to the other ERGs. So it's really all about sharing and partnering on some of these things.
Yeah, and I think I would echo that what Liz was saying is that, what's very, very important is to figure out where we have commonalities. And obviously there are a few, and the fight is better together than to separate. I think it's interesting, just intersectionality in general, because it's tough to really understand all of our backgrounds. Like, for example, with me, I shared, I identify as Chinese. I also identify as Black. I also identify as a woman from the South. Like, I have very different experiences than maybe even someone in Dream in Color, which is our Black network. And so it even happens within our network sometimes. I remember one time we had like a get together, everyone was playing spades, and they were like, "You don't know how to play spades?" And it's like, I didn't grow up playing spades. Why do you assume that I know how to play spades? So I think on one side of it, yes, it's like us, coming together is so important, but then it's also having the space to recognize that we do have, we come from different, backgrounds, but there are some things that we can come together on, and we can even have understanding within our own cohorts. That's very important. And I think as an ERT, that's one of the things that's so important. We offer that space, especially in the corporate settings that traditionally may not have been as acceptable. Is something that we push for internally. And I think that's how we've approached that, is to have those conversations going and see where action can be taken collectively in that front. So completely echoing what Liz said here on intersectionality.
Awesome. So I feel like collaboration amongst ERGs within like your organization is actually a really easy way to promote intersectionality in programming. Audrey, Mable, can y'all talk about how you've successfully done this?
Yeah, absolutely. It was making me think your prior question just about, how to champion intersectionality, and just to build off of that and answer this question. I think it's about like, who do you have in your leadership as well? Like, I think about in our women's ERG, as we were going through a transition in our ERG leadership, being deliberate and thinking about like, who are the people that should be in these leadership roles? Are they going to represent other identities, not just, identifying as a woman, but what are the voices that we're bringing into who is leading the ERG? Who is, what are those perspectives that are coming into it? And I think that's, critically important, is not just to say, especially for, I feel like the women's ERG at GA is one of our largest. And so really it carries a responsibility to be nuanced in how we're thinking about the issues that affect this really large cross-cut of the population of our employees and our team, and to really figure out how can we work with other ERGs? How can we make programming? How can we make communication, engagement that cuts across all of those? I feel like we're only just starting to do that. I think one of the things I've been really impressed with before I joined ERG leadership at GA, and then now, being a part of it, is how much the ERG collective leaders really support one another. You know, cross-posting our events, checking in, making sure that we're really talking to one another as, you know, as much as we can, to really say, you know, what support is needed, or, you know, can you help source a speaker, right? If we're looking for a speaker with multiple identities or backgrounds, then, or experiences, then saying, hey, we need some help, right? I don't know anyone like that. Can you sort of maybe tap your network, or you know, engage someone that would be outside of, you know, my immediate reach. So for me, it's, you know, really kind of like who's thinking about these topics, who's, you know, really voicing their opinions around them, and then stopping and asking the question of who's not in the room, right? Whose voices aren't we hearing? Also, you know, at GA, we have you know, a subset of ERGs that have been founded, but there's still other communities that don't have formal ERGs, right? And so I think that's also, you know, something that I've been thinking about is, you know, it doesn't have to take a formal ERG sort of structure for us to invite other voices into that collaboration. And so that, I feel like that is a responsibility of ERG leadership, to go out and say, okay, of our employees, of our team, what else should we be doing? Who else doesn't feel like we've really hit the mark yet in terms of talking about your experience and the nuance of it and bringing that story to light?
Love that, Andre. Love that. Love that. And I also wanted to shout out Liz for what you said earlier. For our fight to be important, everyone's fight has to be important. Really, definitely something that is very true. And to Audrey's, what you said earlier about cross-posting and supporting each other, because we want to help each other fight, right? There is equally as important, because, you know, when it comes to ERG leadership, bandwidth tends to be such a huge challenge, because we know a lot of us are doing this on top of our day jobs, all volunteer work, right? And so to the extent that we can continue to promote intersectionality, support each other, and become an ally like that is absolutely fantastic. So on the note of promoting intersectionality, I wanted to dive in a little bit deeper of the specific challenges that I face as an Asian Zat ERG leader. Really is twofold. And that is, first, we talked about within just, you know, for the last 10 minutes, how do we promote mutual understanding between each other of our ERG groups, like for us, Asian Zat and other marginalized community members, but also for the Asian community, how do we do the same within our own community, our very large Asian Zat diaspora umbrella group, made up of over 50 ethnicities, all speaking various dialogues, by the way, kind of similar to what Audrey said about women at being a large group to represent, right? Huge responsibility. Well, for the Asian Zat community, very, very similar. How do we acknowledge commonalities and nuances between such a large group, right? And really sincerely align interests across this group. So to acknowledge this gap, we've done several things to raise awareness and advocate for acknowledging and really understanding the finer nuances within this large umbrella. First, also, again, echoing Audrey, ensuring that our leadership team is made up of leaders of these various ethnic groups under API. So this means that instead of following a preconceived structure from our lovely diversity and belonging team of having global lead, events lead, comms lead, et cetera, we also carved out ERG roles within our ERG, informed by our own knowledge and experience for what we call ethnic focus groups, like Chinese at, Vietnamese at, Korean at, Filipinos at, Taiwanese at, so on and so forth, you get the point. This is to ensure that we are as inclusive as possible as we are leading, right? And we ensure that our programming advocacy work matches that as well from the get-go, right? At the same time, we also try our best to be strategic about opportunities to highlight the fact that the Asian community is not a monolith, and that usually is organized through panels like what we're doing today, having these conversations, right? For example, we did a Women's at Asian Zat collaboration featuring a speaker, Mimi Vu, Southeast Asian descent, daughter of Vietnamese refugees, about human trafficking and the dangers of the sexual fetishization of Asian women. We also try to align our social impact team to create nonprofits that are representative of the API diaspora for donation and matching opportunities. Also, we've also made an ask, as important as it is for us to continually organize events, raise awareness through that way, we got to follow up with making hard asks to the company to ensure that, you know, all this work that we're doing leads to some sort of a policy structural change within the company. And so the ask that we've made is to further disaggregate company data collection of self-identification categories from simply collecting whether checking the box for us Asian or Pacific Islander, to being able to say, oh, I'm Southeast Asian or I'm East Asian, so that we're better able to reflect the diverse APIs in the company. We're better able to deeper dive into understanding differences within these groups and allow us to analyze, understand the disparity of experience across employees to address gaps. So that's just the work within the Asians at ERG Group. In regards to partnering with other groups, we've also come a long way here as well. And I really also want to be candid here for a moment. While there are so many really stellar examples of, for example, the Asian and Black community allyship in the past, especially during civil rights movement, we really wouldn't be here today without our fearless Black brothers and sisters. Between the Asian Black community, there's still work to do and misunderstandings to bridge, for example, right? So what I can do as an Asians at ERG leader is to really create spaces for discussion within our group about this. So for example, from organizing our first Tackling Anti-Black Racism in the API community workshops to continuing to have these conversations candidly in our virtual safe spaces. Today, we formed a Women of Color Coalition, which is made up of diverse ERG leaders connecting regularly to align on top of mind issues within the diversity and belonging space. We worked together to draft an allyship letter, which was elevated company-wide on what it means to be an ally. And one of our asks we made was to encourage allies to step up in directly supporting our programming. For example, by helping us project manage, which would be such a game changer here. So there are so many ways that we can try to work together here to move the needle and to champion intersectionality across and inside of our companies. And it really starts with acknowledging the significance of this to build bridges, planning and the executing. So it's great, again, that we are having the conversation here today in this panel.
Yeah, and I think something that both of you touched on was just the intentionality of ERG Leads on promoting the different issues from each of the groups. So I love that. Jordan, I have a question for you. So during the protests of 2020, the NBA was very vocal in the support of the Black Lives Matter movement. In your role as a Dream in Color lead, how did you center Black women in that conversation?
Yeah, and I'm seeing a lot of great questions too in this, and I want to bring this full circle, but not take up too much time. But 2020 was a pivotal year, I think, for every ERG, the NBA. It was crazy, and I mean, it was a huge responsibility, but there were a lot of key learnings coming out of that year. I want to start by just sharing, like, for some of you that may be so early in your ERG, this is where it really, as a leader, I really took a step back in terms of the key learnings and recognized there were things that we needed. Just to go back to intersectionality, and that one was we needed a space to have these conversations. We needed a leadership team that looked like us, that could help us to push those conversations forward. We needed to know that we had support. And really, we needed to have things in writing that, like, we are going to talk about these issues. Like, it's not something we can hide behind. It's not corporate versus human nature. It's all one conversation. And we knew we needed those things. So a lot of things happened in 2020. 2021 really, that came from 2021. And this may answer some of the questions in the chat, is putting together a leadership structure and a leadership team. So like right now, I have 3 executive champions that sit at the senior leadership level. Even after that, I have advisors that sit at a high level as well in the organization. And this really helps me to push conversations along in different departments. I sit in media partnerships, so I can't necessarily speak to HR and how they should do hiring, but I can give them, if they trust me, which they do, I can give them my viewpoint and the viewpoint of Dream in Color members, which is about a cohort of 300. And this comprises of folks that identify and those that are allies. They're all a part of the cohort, and we do regular pulse, check-ins with them, and we share that data internally with HR. And so we only can continue the conversations. I think that's really important. I just wanted to just take a step back so you guys see that it is so hard to do it alone. in my opinion, and we tried that in 2020. And I think it's very important to have a leadership structure in place. And then to answer some of the questions, that can help touch points to some of the regions and all the other folks that maybe want to be a part that we would then need to impact, because this is a huge undertaking. But I just wanted to just level set there. But to answer your questions, Black women during the 2020. So it's interesting. I don't even know if a lot of people know this, but it actually started with the WNBA in terms of when all leagues decided they were going to go dark one day. The WNBA spearheaded that. And I think that conversation sometimes gets lost, that they had a huge impact on just social justice and how sports plays a part in that and the voices that they have. And I think that's really powerful because we see that trend a lot, but sometimes we don't see it get recognized. And so in terms of kind of how we make sure that those conversations are happening, I can tell you that Black Lives Matter on the court actually was because of internal conversations by a Black woman with Adam Silver. Like the conversations were happening monthly with me and a few folks at Dream of Color of why this is important. And I credit Adam a lot on this, and maybe I'm sharing too much because these were like supposed to be like personal conversations, but I credit Adam a lot on this because he recognized that if he didn't have a circle around him that can give him feedback about what the reality is of our experiences, which is diverse, then he cannot really execute or implement anything on the court with players that he can't necessarily identify directly. And I do credit him a lot on that because from that, we've had monthly conversations. But to answer your question on how we make sure that women, Black women are highlighted, it's been difficult, it's been difficult because we're talking about years and years and years of conversations that needed to happen that never happened because we kept it so separate of corporate America. And so we're really pushing it forward. But what has helped, and then, I'll take a pause, is that leadership structure. It's helped because we almost mandated it. Like, it's not a, do we have it or do we not have it? It's like, no, you're going to have these conversations. It's important. And you're going to push for the policy. We need to restructure our DEI group. We have to focus on this. We need to put it in writing. It's on our page for what we call home court, where everybody in the company can see it. And I think that's just really powerful. But change takes time. I won't say that it's perfect at this moment, but I would definitely say that we're in the right direction. And I think, and I feel strongly that having Adam look to us and lean to us, and us being Dream of Color, like he really leans to my employee resource group on the decisions that are made on the court, it is powerful. And I think that's how we get in the direction that we want. And so that's where we are at the league office. And that really happened after 2020, because before that, we were just like, we would go do parties and things like that, and we would come together, play games. After that, we were having monthly meetings with Adam, and we were having agenda topics, and we still have those meetings to this day. And so that's how important it is to continue. So a little bit of
so important to have leadership that supports your ERGs and what you're doing and the conversations that you're trying to have, because they can really push those issues or those challenges forward. So I love that. Next question. So intersectionality is difficult because people have blind spots or maybe ignorant to perspectives that aren't their own. How do you all go about educating employees who are ignorant but open to learning? And then how do you navigate relations with employees who are ignorant but unwilling to learn? Audrey, I'll start with you.
Yeah, this is a big one. And I think that I want to focus on two things, and not to say this is like, the crux of solving it all, but I think that one of the things that I feel as a ERG leader is required is the persistence to keep telling your story. And I think that so much of, not just women, but all of these underrepresented groups and identities and communities is you feel the invisibility, right? You don't feel seen in your like full reality of your struggle, your challenge, your success, all of it. And so I feel like the thing that's kind of become a bit of my North Star, both at General Assembly and other DEI work that I've participated in, is just being really persistent and relentless in voicing as often as you can in the ways that feel comfortable to you on whatever platform you have, both big and small, to just really talk about like what is happening, like pull back that curtain, right? And, you know, I was like hearing Jordan, you describe sort of this turning point, like gave me goosebumps, because like that was a dramatic pulling of the curtain, right? To really say like, this is what's happening with our community. Like you can't turn your face away, like we're making you face this, right? That was, I mean, just so much credit to you and what you've done, and hearing you tell that story is really an honor to be here. But I think that's, you know, that's what I hope people can be inspired by, is really to have leadership, to have your team members, to have your peers really hear about what is happening, what's the reality. You know, this is still Women's History Month, and you know, we're just headed into the last week of it. The first thing that always comes to mind in this month is Equal Pay Day, right? It burns my skin, right? Because Equal Pay Day, which I think was like March 6th or 7th this year, really represents data that's reflective of white women's pay, right? And I know everyone's probably like, yeah, I've heard this here, right? So it's not new news for us who are really embodying this work and practicing it, but there are so many people out there who don't know the true story, who don't know the real data, who don't know what the pay gap is for Black women, for Indigenous women, for Latina women. That's only two intersections of identity, right? Let's add disability, let's add, you know, LGBTQI plus, right? Like trans people, like let's just keep adding other layers of identities. What are the pay gaps in those situations? So, you know, that's just one really kind of microscopic example of how you can tell a true narrative, right? I think there's all these kind of like common truths that are held in kind of the early days of some of this DEI work. And I think it's about having us as a community, like remind people. And if you have to say it every single year, you know, say it again, right? There's going to be someone in the audience who maybe hasn't heard of it, who just, you know, this is news to them. This is an educating moment for them. And so I think that's, you know, that's part of it. I think the unwillingness to learn, you don't control that, right? And I think speaking to what Mable was saying about like this, there's ERG leaders have a lot to do, and how we can maybe like hand off some of that. Like think about what's in your control, right? And as an ERG leader, you control, you know, the stories you're putting out there. You're role modeling the behavior that you want to see in terms of allyship and leadership, right? And I think that amongst many things that we can do, I think that's something that we actually undervalue in ourselves as leaders, is that we're doing that every day in just showing up to do the work.
Sure. And I love that you brought up the pay gap, because that is actually a question I have for Liz. I think when we think about intersectionality, especially in the corporate space, the gender pay gap is something that is top of mind for a lot of people. And with that gender pay gap, we know that Latinas are compensated just 57% of what non-white or what non-Hispanic white men are paid in 2020. So Liz, how have you advocated for pay equity at Workday through your work on the Latinx Employee Belonging Council?
Latina Equal Pay Day is December 8th, 2022. So that tells you that Latinas have to work almost an entire year before achieving, you know, the pay equivalency. One of the things that we do, you know, we highlight this day, you know, whether it's through Zoom backgrounds, through presentations. You know, I think Mable mentioned, you know, having these panel discussions on topics like this is really important to highlight and bring awareness. And we also educate our you know, our Latinas. You know, one of the things that we've done is, for example, you can go to your HR department and you can say, where do I fall in the pay range of what this position pays? You know, you can't say, how do I compare to others, but you can ask what the range is and see where you fall within the range. then you also know, that usually a lot of the times, you're put into what we call a 9 box. Where are you in the 9 box of performance? So if your pay is at the bottom end of the scale, but you're in the top performers, that's a conversation to have with your leaders. And you can get all this information, you're not asking for anything where you're being compared with others. You're asking about just the pay, where do you fall, and how do you compare, and then having those discussions. I will say that Workday, one of the things that they do, they actually do this review of pay parity once a year as part of our compensation plan. So they do evaluate all the employees and where they fall in these 9 boxes and how they're being compensated according to their peers. And if they see a gap, they adjust it. If they see a problem, they address it. But this is all because, people are aware, they're asking the right questions. So again, you want to bring awareness to the corporation, but you also want to make sure that your people are educated on how to address that conversation. So we have a lot of also training on how to ask for a raise, how to promote yourself. Culturally, Latinas are not, they're taught, culturally, even within their culture, right, that you're subservient to, the males within the your culture. You're subservient to your boss, and you should be glad, this immigrant mindset, that you should be glad you have a job, so don't rock the boat, right? And so a lot of them really struggle with, how do I even promote what I'm doing to get a raise without sounding like I'm bragging, or that I am putting myself above the team, because it's all about, and especially when you're in technology. I mean, technology is a very individualistic environment, a very individualistic sector, and you are a collectivistic person, so it's all about the we, and it's hard to detach yourself, the I, from the we. And so how can you stand up and show those contributions? So we have training, we have practices, we have mentoring programs that we've developed, created, where we partner with leaders that can mentor, the women, and how, can they learn from these leaders to address some of those questions. So those are just a few of the things that we try to do.
That is awesome. And you say just a few, but that's actually a lot more than what a lot of companies are doing. So you're getting a lot of love in the chat. Mable, I have a question for you. So since the start of COVID-19 pandemic, Asian Americans have faced a wave of anti-Asian racism and hate incidents. Can you tell us how Airbnb stood with the AAPI community during this time, and how the Asians at group worked to create a safe space for the AAPI employees at Airbnb?
Absolutely. This is a great question. It really gets at the heart of what we really sincerely believe ERG's duty and core mission to do, is really to be able to advocate for our employees and safeguard the well-being of our community, right? And so, with the news about quite the spike of anti-Asian hate crimes that really began surfacing at the start of the pandemic. And just to kind of jog our memories here a bit, between the start of the pandemic, 2020, March to September 2021, reports, collected over 10,000 incidents of anti-hate crimes against Asian and Pacific Islanders across the US. And you can actually check out quite a few of these reports in this really helpful source right here. And hate incidents reported by women also make up more than half of all reports, by the way. Many of our victims are our dear seniors. Just recently, the loss of Michelle Alyssa Go and Christina Yuna reminds us that more work still needs to be done here, right? Within the community, with each other. But nonetheless, though, what really took course last year truly has been a defining moment for the Asian Pacific Islander community as a whole, at our companies and in the larger community itself. Our calls to stand with the Asian Pacific Islander community, particularly post Atlanta shooting, resulted in our CEO, Brian Chesky, really sincerely acknowledging the pain felt by our community, and committed to a series of actions that our company would take to condemn racism and discrimination and stand with the community. And this includes, for the first time, $500,000 donated to support API nonprofits, including Asian Americans Advancing Justice, National and the Atlanta chapter, the GoFundMe API Community Fund, and matching donations from our employees to organizations. Also, for the first time, taking a public stance through our external statements through our social channels, and linking our employee sourced anti-discrimination resource guide to promote allyship there. This is also shared with the Airbnb host and guest community, by the way. Equally important is to create space for candid dialogue on issues important to the API community, right? And we do this through what we call Asians at virtual safe spaces. Throughout the pandemic, everything's got to be virtual, right? So this happens through across Asians at members, in which we're really trying to encourage having vulnerable conversations facilitated by external professionals, ideally someone with a solid understanding of API history and background, as well as kind of a therapist background is super helpful to really guide us through these hard conversations. We organized for the first time as well, a lot of firsts last year, the Asians at Listening session, which is organized by myself and the leadership team in partnership with our diversity and belonging team. And this is really to center the API voice, aligning to various themes like belonging challenges we talked about a little bit across our groups. We have professional development / growth bamboo ceiling challenges and other gaps. And these are really to showcase stories told by our employees and also attended by our almost all of our executives at Airbnb. We also hosted a company-wide conversation on the dangers of the model minority myth, showcasing voices of Asian leaders, senior ranking Asian leaders at Airbnb on the company stage for the first time. I would say, really reflecting back, we've truly come a long way. It really started off with recognizing that we have a battle to make here with the company and in the community, and first just gaining legitimacy, just like understanding and buy-in and understanding the community. To this day, we still get marginalized, you know, like I could be walking out in the street in broad daylight right now, and this happened a couple of weeks ago. I could be speaking English, Chinese, whatever. Someone would still tell me to go back to China. So it's really, this experience is really, really real for us. And, you know, to the extent that we can get acknowledgement from our leaders that this is how we've been feeling, right? Like silence, neglected, to say the least, you know, and to carve out spaces for support goes such a long way. And also equally as important in our advocacy work here is that we've also been heavily leaning on external groups like the Asian Leaders Alliance that I mentioned earlier, an umbrella group representing over 200 Asian ERG leaders from around the globe, to really lean on each other. We have toolkits that sets ERG leaders up for success when it comes to navigating advocacy work, which is not easy. At the face of what ERGs do, it seems like we do really great work with celebrations and organizing events and everything. But at the same time, again, we have to back that up with hard policy asks to really encourage actual change within our own communities. And so this is where the advocacy work, this is where leaning on external groups, like I could see Chezi as a great resource as well, Asian Leaders Alliance, other groups that do the same work, Soundboard, make sure that we are getting fair, you know, like fair treatment here, like not getting lowballed or anything like that, to be candid, is really important. So to sum this up, while we're really, you know, saddened that time and time again, for all our communities, it takes a tragedy for something really to be done. I'm still very proud of our collective resiliency to continue trekking forward, even though, you know, sometimes it seriously feels like the odds are against us. We want to give up, but we know this work requires baby steps, and proud that we are continuing to do this to build momentum within our own communities and with each other. So
awesome. Thank you, Mable. And my last question before we open it up to audience Q&A, Audrey, it is for you. So as a queer Latina woman and mother who works to break down barriers for other underrepresented minorities in the workplace, how do you use General Assembly's Women's ERG to create an inclusive and equitable environment for people of all identities and backgrounds?
Yeah, great question. I really see it as one piece, right? And I think I failed in my introduction to share, some of the other ways that I intersect with this work. But one of those is being a career coach, primarily working with people who are part of underrepresented groups. And I work primarily with women of color who are looking to move from kind of middle management to senior leadership positions in tech. And it's such a great intersection with GA, right? GA is helping people who usually sit, kind of outside of tech, haven't had that tech experience or career, moving them into that opportunity. And so I see our women's ERG being a microcosm of that as well, right? Like, how can I, as an ERG leader, empower women in this work? Right? How can I use the ERG as a mechanism for developing leadership and leaders within the company? And so, we have a relatively new leadership team that just started this year. We kind of had to reform. And that's what, that's where I kind of hang my hope on, is that now we have, 8 additional people who are going to move forward this work, right? Who are going to understand what ERGs are. Many of them haven't had that exposure before. They haven't, DEI isn't baked into, their day-to-day job. And so for me, it's like, how can I leverage the ERG to create more strong voices and strong leaders to continue doing this work? And I sort of, I sit on the shoulders of the ERG leaders before me at General Assembly, right? I have much gratitude for the people who, made the founders of these ERGs, right? Who created the nascent steps of DEI at GA. And I think that's something that even just kind of thinking about this conversation had me thinking about wow, I wouldn't be able to do this work if someone hadn't just started that conversation and said, we need this to exist, right? It doesn't exist yet. It needs to happen. And sort of all of the evolutions of that to this day, for me, it's like the leadership piece, having people to carry this work forward, to be those voices. How can I do that more effectively, right? And so this work has, it's like an emotional roller coaster. There's days when I'm like, oh my goodness, we're not doing enough. There's no progress. But sometimes I'm like, you know what, we're still here. We're building on top of what, others have built, they've built the strong foundation. We're building on top of it. And just the existence of us, the presence of us, knowing that we're there. We have so many new members who tell us in our Slack channel that they're like, wow, I didn't even know companies did this, right? Because they're coming from places that it didn't exist. And so for me, that's like, wow, okay, if we can expose people, if we can teach them that this is the way they should feel welcome, that this is the way they should feel when they're joining a new company, and this is the kind of community space that can be created, that's the progress, right? It's basically teaching them that there is a better way. There is, something that that is more fruitful and productive for all of us. And it doesn't have to, be like maybe some of the other experiences we've all had in places where it didn't exist.
Thank you, Audrey. I think that was a great way to end our general discussion, of just like a reminder to all of the ERG leaders on this call that your work is so important. Even if one new member of the company is like, I feel so included, or this is so much more equitable or inclusive, or fostering of belonging than my last company, then that's a win. So thank you for that. So we are going to open it up to.
Before we go into the questions, do you mind if I just add one thing, just as in general? What I've heard some themes that actually, what we heard is in our communities, we've actually had a tragedy that made it a limelight, so, and what I think we need to challenge our organizations is that it shouldn't take tragedy to see this. It shouldn't be in the media for us to just do something. If you have a strong policy, it should withhold anything that's going outside And I think with that, kind of when you focus on that tragedy, and say, we're going to focus on our Black employees or our Asian employees because of what's going on in society, what you're telling me is, okay, you Latina, something has to happen to you before we focus on you. And we're being conditioned to say that there is a very small piece of the pie, ERGs, so you all have to fight for it. And so, and what we should be asking is, why aren't we getting a bigger piece of the pie? We shouldn't be fighting over this one piece and fighting for attention. We all have things that, that where it's not equitable for us. And so how do you build equity regardless of what's going on? And if your strategy is strong enough, it should support their employees regardless of what's going on outside of the organization.
Yeah, I just want to really quickly, and it might answer the question here of like not over promising, but just one thing that I really wanted to hone in on that I learned is that the root to me, and we did a lot of trainings in this, is policy. There's a lot of policies that's been happening in organizations that existed years before, and resources. Like at this point, we've had the conversations, and I'm going to be honest with you guys, at some point I was just like, I don't want to have another conversation. I don't want to have another touch base. I don't want to talk about this anymore. Like, I'm drained. I did it for 2 years. And now we're at the point of action. So what the NBA did, we created what was called the coalition and the foundation. The foundation supports economics. So we work with the teams and players to give money and grants to certain initiatives in the community to do the work. And the coalition does it from legislature. We work with the government to figure out and push things forward. And that was really, really important because, and I think Audrey and Liz's point is, if we don't have a structure, and a lot of times that falls on the ERG Leads to encourage the organization that we need a structure, then in 2025, we're still having conversations. And we, at that point, don't need to have conversations anymore. And that's why we got to where we were in 2020. So my point is, like, I definitely think it's very important to, as you're building this, to think about what the long-term structure and strategy is. And in your leadership roles, how can you encourage your organization to put things in place so that it's sustainable? So the coalition, the foundation, when I go on and do whatever I do from here, they will exist. And this work will continue to work. And I think continue to happen. That's very important. And just to maybe touch on the question in the chat, it's hard because we're now programmed to wanting change now. And that just is not, it doesn't happen like that. And from my perspective as a leader, it's been very important to be, what I think our members really wanted was just an update. Like, even if there is nothing happening, at least an update is helpful for, us to know, okay, the conversations are still in the works. So that, and also just data of, this is how long it took us, it's a mindset that's been happening for centuries. Like, it's going to take some time, but we're taking baby steps. And I think that's very important to have those active touch points with your members, so that you don't overpromise, to answer the question in the chat here, but also level set that these are small steps to the bigger picture. And this is our strategy. The strategy piece to me is the most important piece to this, because I'm really worried that we get years down the line and we didn't have a strategy in place, we don't have the resources, and the work won't continue. And I encourage all ERTs to just really think about that as you're building. What's your long-term strategy so that you have the right stakeholders in the room overall. Sorry, I just wanted to just point on that too, because I think that's really, really important. And there's a lot of systematic things that need to be addressed.
Sure, thank you for jumping into the questions also. I do have a question for the rest of the women on the panel. What do you expect from your executive sponsors, especially as it relates to intersectionality? I know Jordan touched on this earlier, but Mable, Liz, Audrey, how are your leaders supporting you in your ERG initiatives?
A lot of the times I think that for ERG leaders, that people expect like they have to look with you or have a shared background. And actually, we were very strategic in the leader that we chose for our ERG. She's not Latina, so she doesn't share our culture. But what she did have is she had this is how you get things done mentality. And the fact that she's a very well-respected leader, so for us, it was about having this voice for us when we're not in the room. And so I think what you expect from your leader, for an ERG, they don't have to share the same background, but they have to be willing to listen and understand what you're going through, and therefore understand what others are going through. And they need to be the voice, not just for your ERG, but they need to be the voice for all those ERGs and all the issues in the room. They have to be brave. They have to be willing to speak up, because a lot of the times that strategy that Jordan talked about and those policies that are being made are made, in spite of us, outside of us. And so you want to make sure that that leader is supportive of that.
I agree. And I feel like some people can get hung up on trying to find a leader that identifies with you or with the members of the group, but it's also like when you have an ally or someone who doesn't necessarily identify and they're in the majority, those are the people who can really push those conversations forward because they're talking to other people in the majority. So I love that point, Liz.
Wanted to echo a lot of what Liz had said there. It absolutely is important that our executive sponsors, leaders at our companies really be able to champion our missions across, just not within our community, but just promoting intersectionality as well. I think one huge challenge area with engaging executive sponsors, leaders at our companies, to be quite honest with everyone, is access is a real challenge because these folks are super, 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 can I emphasize even a little bit more, super busy. And so getting time on their calendar just to do what Liz has mentioned, educate, being open to learning about our various causes and really understanding this so that they can champion our causes is like so important as well. And so to the extent that our ask could be that, simply, can we have regular one-on-one check-ins, so we can talk about this cause, on the long haul, and do a lot of the strategic planning that Jordan mentioned, right? So that we set ourselves up and our community up for success in the long term strategically. And it's also important there with access with these one-on-ones is soundboarding, thought partnership. We're all just, one piece of this larger puzzle. And sometimes, when it comes to understanding how corporate works, internal politics work, advocacy works, moving the needle works, we gotta check in with our leaders and kind of get a temp check too, like temp check and get their thoughts on what would work and what wouldn't, just to get a sense, so that to answer the question earlier about how do we ensure that we're not overcommitting or overpromising our members, is that, of course, we are going to be experts with our cause and what our members feel, how our members feel, and what the asks, potentially what are some of the asks are coming from our membership. But at the same time, we want to be able to continue this conversation with leaders, and ensure that this dialogue persists so that we're prepared with specific asks when the time is right? And that we would get our leaders buy-in and support when we do make those asks, so that, again, we are not overpromising, right? Like we make sure that our conversation between members, as our role as a mediator, really, between company leaders and our members, are kind of working in tandem here to move towards that cause that we're advocating for. So I would say access, seeking soundboard thought leadership, partnership with our leaders, really managing our stakeholders, including our members and our leaders, and ensuring that we're all consistently focalizing and elevating our cause here is really key.
Awesome. Thank you, Mable. And it does look like we are at the top of the hour. Liz, Audrey, Jordan, and Mable, please, thank you so much for joining us today. This is a great conversation. I'm seeing all the love that you all are getting in the chat. To our audience, thank you for joining. We will send out a recording of this afternoon. And if you'd like to continue the conversation, again, feel free to reach out to myself or my brother at team@chezi.co. Thank you all and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.